Hendrik Bruges Tripel Wild.
Life is too short to be drinking shitty beer.
Welcome to another edition of Bands, Bikes and Booze Reviews. Tonight, another one from Belgium, and this is a special one. This is from the Hendrik Brewery. Well, it's not a brewery actually, it's the Halve Maan Brewery, and this is their Hendrik, part of their Hendrik range, I should say, and this is their Wild, or is it pronounced Wild? I think it might be Wild actually. But it's their Wild beer. Now, I'll get onto everything about this beer in a sec, but here's a little story for you. You might laugh, you might not. The missus, the other day, she did one of them things where you pull out a few hairs in your head, you send it off, and they can tell what your allergies are just by going through your hair. How they do it, I don't know, but it came back and there were some interesting ones there. She's allergic to fish and seafood and stuff. Well, I knew that anyway, but she's also allergic to some other stuff as well, which she doesn't normally eat. But it was quite cheap, and she said to me, do you want to do it? I can get you a little bit of a discount. So me being the tight bastard that I am, I said, yeah, let's give this a go and see what I've got an allergy to, put it that way. So the turnaround is quite quick. It's roughly around 3 or 4 days. I got my results through today. And to say I was shocked would be a fucking understatement. Apparently, I'm allergic to malt, I'm allergic to hops, and I'm allergic to ale. That was in there as well. Now, I don't know whether they've fucking taken my hair and just looked at what I'm made up of. I'm 99% fucking beer, so how can I be allergic to it? I've never had any real adverse effects from beer, aside from being out of my fucking nut and having a fucking huge hangover the next day. What were the other things I was allergic to? Apparently I'm allergic to dairy stuff, which again I find really hard to believe. Allergic to gluten, so I'm gluten intolerant. Again, I find that hard to believe. I eat loads of pasta, I eat lots of bread, I eat basically anything that's got fucking wheat in it, I eat, not to mention fucking beer. So I'm not sure about this, but it come up with some other fucking mental things as well. Now my missus got this as well in hers. Apparently there's an element that you find in tin cans that I'm allergic to. She's allergic to as well. I could kind of get it because I do drink a lot of beer out of cans. But the strangest one, well, I don't know why they even fucking put it there. Apparently I'm allergic to lead. I think every fucking human being on this planet is allergic to lead, whether it's fired out of a gun, and before you say anything, I know bullets are not made of fucking lead. But yeah, it says I have an adverse reaction if the metallic elements in my body, if the lead goes above a certain range. It's like, for fuck's sake. Of course it'll happen to anyone. I'm surprised they didn't put fucking mercury down there or something like that. Anyway, I'm digressing. But just to let you know, everyone, I'm allergic to beer. Now, I'll rephrase that. I'm allergic to fucking bad beer. I'm not allergic to good beer. And I'm hoping this is going to be a good one. Now, the Halve Maan Brewery, they're based in Bruges, one of my favourite cities in Europe. And I've been there numerous occasions. I absolutely love it. I've done gigs there. I've been over there as a tourist. And it's just brilliant. Now, you might think Belgium's boring. It may be for some people. I don't find it boring at all. I've been over there before. The beer is always interesting. The history is always interesting. And the bands that I've gone to see over there, well, it's what I do. It's part of who I am. So for me, Belgium is not boring at all. And if you're into Belgian beer, then Bruges is a great place to go as a beer tourist. Now, Hendrik are based in Bruges, as I said, and they brew or Strava Hendrick. I keep calling it Strava Hendrick. It's not. It's the Halve Maan Brewery. That's one of the range of beers that they do. But what the Halve Maan are really renowned for is the Bruges Zot. Now, Bruges Zot is the strong blonde or triple, whatever you want to call it, that originates from Bruges. I remember going to Bruges probably one of the first or second times I went in there, and we were staying in a hotel, and I said to the barman in the hotel, I was waiting for a couple of my mates to come then, and I said, I'll have a beer. And he says, what do you want? I said, I'll tell you what. I said, give me something uniquely Belgian. And he said, well, if you're in Bruges, you have to drink Bruges Zot. And I had just got a taste for wheat beer at the time. No, I'm lying to you. It wasn't the first time I was in Bruges. Before, when I was in Bruges, I always drank Jucola, but I wanted to try something different. I asked him for a wheat beer because I just got the taste of wheat beer, and he said, why don't you try this? This is the Bruges Zot. He said, if you like German wheat beer, you might like that. And I tried it, and it was absolutely gorgeous. It was really nice, fresh, of course, from the brewery, and he actually told me quite a lot about the brewery and told me about the pipeline that they built underneath Bruges. It was done by crowdfunding, and everyone who contributed got some free beer for a year from the brewery, which I think is fantastic. But the Straffer Hendrick is, as I say, it's a range that come from the Halve Maan. This particular range didn't start until 1981 when a female brewer joined the company. Well, it was part of the family. Her name was Veronique Maes, I think that's how it's pronounced. She was one of the first female Belgian brewers, and she came up with this range. And this particular beer is seasonal. It changes every year. So this is a 2021, so it's 2 years old. And this beer is matured for 3 months when it's made, and you can keep it for as long as you want, and it's bottle conditioned. Obviously, like most Belgian beers, it goes through a secondary fermentation in the bottle. But the yeast is quite unique in this, in that it's Brettanomyces yeast, and if you've not heard of that before, but if you've heard of lambic beer before, then Brettanomyces yeast is what gives it its flavour. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this has potentially got a little bit of a sour taste to it. Now, I know, judging by some of the comments on certain beers that I've reviewed in the past, especially the lambics, some people are not a fan of sour beer, and I get it. You know, if you just don't like that taste, then that's fine. I'm not going to try and convince you that you should like it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. That's it. But I love it. I really do like sour beer. However, it has to be sour intentionally. Off flavours in beer is not nice, or sour off flavours in beer, and it does dictate. And you know, whether you get this on your cask beer, sometimes it's perceived as a vinegary taste, but it basically means that oxygen has reacted with the beer. Now, oxygen, of course, is the enemy of beer. That's why carbon dioxide is put in the beer to give it a bit of fizz, and also that's why cask beer the shelf life isn't that great, because eventually the oxygen will get in there and the yeast reacts with it, the yeast from the air, and there is yeast in the air, which is coming back to this, because wild, I think it comes down to the wild fermentation, or spontaneous fermentation as it's sometimes known. That is, of course, the yeast that's in the air. The yeast that you normally get in beer is specially, or the yeast cultures that you get in beer are specially formulated to be used in brewing. Wild yeast, however, is what you just get normally, and that will react with the sugars in the beer and give it its own unique flavour. And normally that is a sour flavour, or a sherbety flavour. Sometimes you might even get like a cidery taste for it. If you've ever had a lambic, then that's Brettanomyces yeast. That's what it is, and it produces that lactobacillus flavour that gives it its unique style. And there are schools of thought that say certain regions produce a better yeast, wild yeast in the air, of course, and certain regions around Brussels, which is where lambics originate from. I think there's a certain amount of square kilometres around Brussels, or a region of Brussels, that has the best, supposedly, Brettanomyces yeast. But there you go. Fascinating stuff if you're a beer geek like me. If you're just a drinker, then that's probably boring as fuck. So let's get on to the next section. Right, this is a 300ml bottle. It is 10%, so it is a true triple, and it's a seasonal, not a seasonal beer, but a yearly beer. It's like a vintage beer, and certain vintages are going to change. And of course, that's going to be the case, because if you're using wild fermentation in this, you're going to get different. You're going to get different makeups of yeast every year, so it may taste slightly different. And of course, as I mentioned, this is bottle conditioned, so if you keep this for a few years, then it's going to be a lot more rounded. You know, if you watch my video, my hour-long video, some people complained about it, I know, but my channel, my fucking rules. My hour-long video recently of the Fuller's Vintage Ale and the Bateman's Vintage Ale, you get a lot more about how the bottle conditioning works, etc. But basically, Brettanomyces yeast is very, very active, and any sugar in this will get eaten up. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say the sweetness factor on this isn't big. Now, the IBUs on this are 35, and if you're not sure what IBUs are, it's the International Bittering Units, which basically determine how bitter a beer is, and it has to be taken into context, as I always say. So, for example, if you've got a Pilsner that's 35 IBUs, then that could potentially be about right, but it's at the very end of the scale for Pilsners. If you've got a West Coast IPA, you know, which are bitter beers, bitter hop bitterness in the beer, that's actually quite mellow. Well, I wouldn't say quite mellow, but it's on the weaker end of the IBU scale. Normally, West Coast IPAs are sort of 45 and above, and of course, depending on the amount of alpha acids that are in the yeast, in the hops that they've used, then it's going to vary. But to give you some context, Weiss beer, you know, the sweet Weiss beer with bubblegum and sometimes them kind of sweet flavours, then that is going to be sort of 17 IBUs. So it's all relative, if you understand my meaning. You have to take it into context with the style of beer. Now, 35 IBUs for a triple, triples can be quite bitter, because the ethanol does give it some bitterness, but there's also, they use hops in these beers, and they're normally English style hops, and they are quite big on the bitterness, usually fuggles, so there is a bitterness in there, and there's also some of that earthiness and the mustiness. If you hear snoring, that is Percy. But I am digressing. There is unfortunately no brew sheet on this. It doesn't say what actually is in the beer in terms of hops and what yeast. But I'll just give you the spiel on the side. So, traditional top fermentation beer, brewed by the unique family brewery, the Halve Maan, which has been located in the historical heart of Bruges since 1856. Yeah, 1856 is when the brewery was founded. 1981 when the Straffer Hendrik range was founded. Straffer Hendrik Wild, I'm going to call it Wild, it could be Wild if you're going to be talking Flemish, is a version of the original triple beer, which is really nice. I've reviewed that on the channel, please check that out, in which the beer is re-fermented with wild Brettanomyces yeast that give the beer a longer shelf life with a unique evolution in taste over the years. Fascinating stuff, not for Percy, he's snoring his head off. Let's go on to the next section. Right, I'm going to be drinking it out of a tulip glass, and I don't know whether I'm going to get it all into the tulip glass, but I'm going to attempt to. Really, I should be drinking this out of a. Oh, you fucker! Yeah, I knew that'd happen. I effing well knew that'd happen. This beer is so wow. That aroma, Jesus, that really is big. And my desk is covered in Belgian beer at the moment. Oh, the aromas are massive. Well, let's just see what aromas we're getting here. Yeah, sweet and sour. No, not Chinese, but there is a sweetness to it, and there is a sourness to it. Now, 2021. Is, in the grand scheme of things, relatively new. But if you let that mature for a while, then that would smell and taste quite different, I would imagine. Right, I'm going to let this settle. I'm going to clear out the mess. I will be back presently. Right, clean the mess up. Got a little bit more into the glass, and there it is. There's still some left in the bottle, but wow, that smells like quite a new lambic. Now lambics, of course, are matured for however long they are matured for, but this one, because it's quite sweet, it almost smells like a sweet cider, if you can imagine that. Now I'm not a massive fan of cider, but if I'm going to be drinking cider, I do prefer the drier to the sweeter. But I have to say, in a blindfold test, you would have this down as a lambic, not a triple. Which I suppose it's a combination of the two. Well, it is a combination of the two. I've just told you that, haven't I? It's based on the triple, but it's got the spontaneous or the wild fermentation going on in there. Right, get a little bit more in there. Right, enough gassing. Let's get it down my Gregory Peck. Good health. Whoa. Oh, that is so complex. That is just a bombardment of flavour. Now, I want to reiterate this. If you don't like sour beers, you're not going to like this. So, when I recommend it, it's recommended with a caveat. The sourness is definitely there. If you like lambics, this is a little bit different. So bear that in mind with whatever I'm going to describe in the flavours. All right. So there you go. Finally, got everything into the glass. You've got to be careful about these beers, though. As I say, with wild fermentation, they will just froth up because there's so much carbonation in there, where that Brettanomyces yeast will just eat up all that sugar. And of course, what is the byproduct of yeast when it eats sugar? It farts and it burps carbon dioxide, which is where you get your carbonation from, and it pisses alcohol. Because yeast, of course, is a living organism, and they get rid of waste matter, as do most living organisms. But there you go. You're drinking piss, basically. Yeast's piss. Fucking what a thought. It's nice. You can definitely get the triple in there. Now, what I was saying earlier about this, the Halve Maan Straffer Hendrik triple being really good, I do recall that it was an excellent triple, as is everything from this Straffer Hendrik range. I do recommend that. This one is a little bit different. Now, if you like the triple, if you can imagine that, the bitterness from that triple, there is a touch of clove on there. I am getting that, but it's not big. The dominant thing on this is the yeast, as is the case with most Belgian beer. The yeast is dominant, but this yeast in particular is sour, so it is something to bear in mind. And as I say, the best way to describe it is probably a mix between a Belgian triple and some dry type cider. Right, I've let that calm down a little bit because the carbonation was really aggressive on that, and it was a little bit cold as well, and I really wanted to get the whole spectrum of flavours that are in here, because this is a really complicated beer, and I wanted to let it cool down a little bit because I think it was a little bit too cold. I'd taken it out of the fridge and I left it for about half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, and I just think because it's the room's relatively cold, I think it's not sort of warmed up as I thought it would. But let's go in again. Oh, that is bitter, yeah. I do get that. And it tastes like hot bitterness on the arse end of it. Probably mixed with a bit of ethanol as well. However, you wouldn't think this was 10%. And the reason you wouldn't think it's 10% is because, as I say, that yeast has devoured all that sugar in there. So there's no trace of sort of candy sugar in there. It's more like a a sweet cider with that yeast, you know, the apple bitterness. That's the kind of flavour you're getting on there, but the finish is just pure bitterness. It's nice though, I do like it. And the more you drink, the more bitter it does get. Now, of course, there is that sourness on the palate. It's, yeah, I can only really describe it as like a cider, maybe a little bit of sherbet on there. You know, it's a proper lambic sourness that it's got on there. But as I say, it's like I wouldn't say it's a tale of two beers, because you do get some sourness on the finish, but you do get you don't get that big bitterness on the palate. That's more to do with the finish. But as I say, I like this. However, this definitely is not a guzzler. You seriously cannot guzzle this beer. The bitterness I'm talking about, I think the ethanol is contributing to that, and at 10%, you've got to do something special to disguise the taste of ethanol. And although the ethanol isn't big on this, you do get that, you know, I wouldn't say burning bitterness, but the warming that you get from ethanol, you do get that as well, coupled with the bitterness, which probably intensifies the bitterness. But yeah, when your aromas on this, it's super big. And it's like a sour fruit and a touch of ethanol on there too. Nice though, I have to say. Yeah, that's good. It's not a guzzler though. It's not one of them 10%ers that I'm making light of and guzzling it down. You really need to, well, I'm not saying you really need to, I don't think you would be in that kind of mindset to just guzzle this down. This is one to savour. There's a lot of things going on with the flavour in this, but as I say, it is an acquired taste, so just bear that in mind if you're going to be getting this. Lovely. Nice sour apple on the palate, and then the finish, that's just hot bitterness and ethanol. Now, if that doesn't sound appealing to you, then it probably won't be. But if you know Belgian beers, I'm not saying look at me, I'm an expert on Belgian beers, but if you like certain Belgian beer styles, like the lambic styles, and lambics really are hit and miss with people. Some people don't like them, some people do. If you're a fan of cider, that real strong West Country cider, then yeah, you're probably gonna like this, but it will be different. If you're a fan of sour beers in general, you may like this. If you're a fan of Belgian beers, you do get a little bit of the usual Tripel character in there, a little bit. I'm not saying there's a lot. There's the vague elements of clove and that, possibly a little bit of banana as well, sweet banana, but the candy sugar, the big sweet candy sugar, that isn't there. That's all been, as I say, devoured by the yeast. But it's nice. It's what I do like in a Belgian beer. So what is the verdict on the Halve Maan Straffe Bruges Tripel Wild from 2021, no less, so 2 years old. It's nice, and again, I want to emphasise this isn't going to be for everyone. It's bottle conditioned, so maybe if you have tried this and you've got a couple of bottles and you can resist the urge, maybe leave it for a year or two and you'll get a completely different beer. But as it stands now, it's very much like a young lambic, in my opinion, and it's nice. I like that sourness, I like the sherbet bitterness, I like the sour apple. I do like that in a beer, and this has got it in abundance. There isn't really much sweetness on this. This is all about the sourness and the bitterness. Initially, when you try it, there is some sweetness on there. I imagine that's probably some of the sugar that hasn't been devoured. Be careful when you open it, because as I say, it's bottle conditioned, and this is 10%. There is wild yeast in there, so it's very, very unpredictable. And yeah, as you saw, it went everywhere. Thankfully now, mostly cleaned up. But yeah, just be aware. You don't want to end up emptying this over you, because this is going to get sticky. But there you go. I like it. I'm going to give it, personally, for me, this is an 8 out of 10 beer. It's really nice. I imagine it's slightly different every year. I got this from the House of Trembling Madness, so they do have some of these in stock, and the Straffe Hendrik beer. Now this is £4.25. So again, you need to weigh this up. If you're going to be spending £4.25, and I'm not, £4.25 might sound like a throwaway amount of money, but I always stress, people are fucking skint now. We all are. We're all paying the price for this fucking shit government. In the UK, certainly, I'm not sure what it's like if you're looking at this video from outside the UK, but just to let you know, we have got a fucking absolute shower of shit running this country. I'm sure you can say the same about your country as well, but £4.25 for 330 mils is a bit of an ask. So I wouldn't say buy this if you're experimenting. It's certainly not an introduction to Belgian beer. This is one for people who know, and I don't want to come across as condescending or a beer snob, but you need to know Belgian styles, in my opinion, to appreciate what this is. And if you try lambics, try and get a cheap lambic. Lindemans, I think, do a Lindemans. Are they the chocolate people? Lindemans, I know. Oh, Lint, you fucking twat. Lindemans do a relatively cheap Gers. Try that first. See what you think of the Gers, and that's quite cheap. You can get that, I think, for roughly about £2.50 a bottle, 330 ml. If you're experimenting with Belgian styles, try that first before you try this, and you spend £4.25 on a bottle. But I like it. I think it's great, and I didn't realise the price, so I'm gonna give it a 7.5. I did say 8, but I'm gonna give it a 7.5 because, as I say, that is a bit of an ask. So yeah, I think the 7.5 is a good mark. And if people question my scoring on these beers, I do take the price into consideration, because, as I say, no one's fucking flush with money at the moment, or if you are, good luck to you, but a lot of people aren't. And if some people are not too flush but they're seeking out good beers, I'd like to think I try and steer them in the right direction for cheap-ish beers with the marks I give. So I do always take that into consideration when I give it a mark. I didn't realise that was £4.25. I must have ordered this drunk. There's me trying to fucking sort my blood pressure out, ordering beer when I'm pissed. But there you go. Anyway, that's going to be a 7.5 out of 10. Recommended with caution. Remember, if you don't like sour beer, don't buy this. And that's another good one from the Halve Maan Brewery and their Straffe Hendrik range. And remember, beer is working class champagne.